Hey, everybody, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. Thanks for coming. We are here today with an amazing guest that's going to help you understand pay transparency and rewards. And he is the founder and CEO at 3R Strategy and coming in from London, England. Welcome, Rameez Kaleem.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited about this because pay transparency is something that is so part of my heart. Even when I'm working with clients that are recruiting or looking for recruiting advice, first thing I say is if you're not going to put the pay in your ads, go find somebody else. Because if you're not transparent about the pay, in my opinion, you're probably not transparent about other things. So that's, my act and reactions there. Tell our listeners a little bit about you and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. I think, that sends a signal around the sort of culture that you might be joining in that organization. And if you can't be honest with people at the start, then, it's not a good way to start that working relationship. So my background has been reward for 20 plus years. I used to be in consultancy and then in-house. And I found that working in reward, we were spending a lot of time doing things behind the scenes, looking at, how to benchmark the executives. And there was very little being done for the rest of the employee population and making sure that their pay was managed in a fair and equitable way. But I think what was really lacking was any sort of communication and transparency with those employees. So I eventually got frustrated and I left and I set up 3R Strategy, where our vision is really a world where organizations have a fair and equitable approach to pay and then communicate that clearly to their employees. And so that's really my focus now, and helping organizations really shape their culture, because pay is probably the most powerful way that we can demonstrate to our employees and to everyone what we really value in our organization.
Yeah, I love it. I wish it was like a worldwide law that you had to be transparent and pay fairly, but that's a whole other conversation that we could probably talk about for 20 hours. I know that obviously you've been a huge advocate for pay transparency. How can you help HR professionals navigate it, especially if maybe the people that they report to aren't 100% bought into pay transparency?
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge, because most of the HR people that I speak to are keen to be transparent and communicate to employees, but often there's resistance from the CEO or the wider executive team, because they're worried about, transparency can be confused with, oh, everyone's going to know what everyone else gets paid. But that's not really what transparency is about. It's about being honest around how we make pay decisions to employees. It's the wider transparency around, for example, salary ranges that we have for different job levels or grades or roles. So the challenge is, how do we convince our leaders that this is the right thing to do? And I think a good way of doing it is demonstrating the business case for doing this. So there's a lot of research out there around, for example, how our ability to even attract candidates is significantly improved. So we know 50% of candidates are not even applying for jobs if there's no pay range attached to it. And then, there's a lot of time wasted for recruitment and managers. Then we also know that Gen Z employees, for example, that's some research says it's almost up to 80% that they're not applying for these jobs.
Wow.
There's research talks about how Gen Z employees is the first generation that are actually willing to compromise on pay to work in an environment where they can feel a sense of belonging and trust, and transparency. So our ability to attract and retain candidates is significantly impacted. And there's a really interesting piece of research published by Josh Bersin organization, where they found that well-communicated pay equity was 13 times more impactful in attracting and retaining employees than higher levels of pay. So if organizations were communicating clearly to employees, they had better in turnover and revenue, they had better business outcomes, they were more likely to innovate and adapt to change, higher employee engagement. So all of these business factors, if we use this, we can hopefully convince our leaders that this is not just the right thing to do, but actually will lead to better business results.
I love it. And that they are shocking, but also believable statistics that 50 to 80% of people will say, I'm not even applying if you're not transparent with your pay. And I say, go for it. Thanks, Gen Z. Keep going at it because we need to hold businesses accountable. And if like I said in the beginning of the show, if in my opinion, if you're hiding pay, what else are you hiding? And how else are you judging or discriminating against me or showing bias as well. So folks that are listening that, have the ear of the executives, show them the statistics, show them the metrics to say, hey, we're wasting our time recruiting and talking and interviewing people who piece out because we're not being transparent with the pay or they don't even apply. And time is money. So even if it's just time of a salaried employee, time is money. But more important than that is your brand gets ruined, right? Because there's so many things that I, as a consumer, can go anywhere on the internet and put good or negative reviews on a company. And
Mm.
candidates are doing that. Candidates have been doing that for quite some time. And the younger generations are much more likely to do it because they want to give the feedback. And again, I'm all there to support it, even though I have to, help my employers fight it half the time as the HR consultant. But I'm also one of those consultants that are just very direct and say, well, you asked for this. So, all right. So we talked a little bit about, aligning pay with culture. You often emphasize that an organization and pay strategy should align with the culture. Can you share any kind of examples, without saying any names, of course, of a company that you've worked with that has successfully done this, where they've changed their pay transparency thoughts and their culture has improved and magically maybe their turnover has slowed?
Yeah, I think, it's not possible to, directly link to pay transparency alone because there's so many factors that, we're looking at. But there are a lot of examples where, we worked with organizations, and like I said, it's such a powerful way to communicate to employees around what we value. So every time we make a decision around who gets a pay rise, who gets a promotion and a pay rise, we're demonstrating to our employees that these are the values and these are the contributions that we value in our organization. So, I mean, an example was we did a big pay transparency project with the publishers HarperCollins, and within the publishing sector, there's a real challenge where a lot of people, because they have a lot of Gen Z employees as well, and they were going online and on social media and sharing their salaries with everyone. And so this was happening, and the publishing organizations realize that they have to be part of this conversation and not pretend this is not happening. So a big drive towards pay transparency was almost being forced upon them. So we did a big piece of project where we looked at their organizational values, because what you want to do is to make sure that if we're talking as an organization around things like teamwork and collaboration, and then there are people who are collaborating, we don't recognize them through pay, for example. If we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and there isn't any fairness around pay, or there's pay equity, then really there isn't a commitment to diversity and inclusion, because people will realize that more and more people are talking about pay. They realize they're not being paid what everyone else is getting paid. And so I think when there's a misalignment with values and our approach to pay, then it creates that culture where people then go to other avenues like social media and start talking about your organization or Glassdoor and all these websites. So it's really important that if we do have organizational values, we look at those values and then see, are we recognizing these values? And it's not just about pay. You might also have a recognition strategy. So you recognize your colleagues and employees when they demonstrate the values you have. So pay and reward in general and recognition is a really powerful way of reinforcing the behaviors that you're looking for from your employees to build that culture that you want to build.
I love it. Yes, it's so, so important. And I like how you said also that, it's not easy to connect everything, right? Because everything there's so many moving parts, including recessions and things like that, that may not be in the company's control. So thank you for mentioning that. Now, I believe you have a salary planning report, correct?
Yes, we publish one every year, which looks at the pay budgets for the year and projected pay budgets for the following year.
All right. So I'll make sure that our listeners that the link to that is in the podcast notes. Talk to us a little bit about, maybe some key trends shaping pay strategies in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, sure. So uh, the main aspect of the report is around pay budgets, which a lot of organizations and HR professionals are looking at now. So when it comes to the new financial year, do we have a 3%, 4% pay budget in order to give salary increases to employees? So we found that the forecast pay increases for the UK were 3.5%, projected for 2025. For the US, it's 3.4%. And I think the reason that's quite interesting is because for the last few years, inflation has been really high. And so organizations and HR professionals have struggled with communicating this message to say, yes, inflation is 8%, 10%, but we're not able to give you those inflationary pay increases because we just don't have the budget or the affordability.
Right.
But this year, with those forecasts of 3.4 in the US, 3.5 UK, and similar results in other countries, these increases are higher than inflation for the first time since the pandemic. And I think it's a positive message for HR professionals to say, our pay budgets are not just based on cost of living or inflation. It's based around a number of these factors, including our affordability or business results. And so this year, we are able to offer you a higher than inflation increase, but that obviously will differ from year to year.
Right, and from country to country and who's in charge of each country at that point in time as well,
Yes,
so so that's
exactly.
very interesting too. What should business leaders be prioritizing to remain competitive and attracting and retaining talent? And I mean, like, the total compensation, pay, rewards. Here in the United States, as you know, we don't have like national health care. We pretend we don't, but we do, but we really don't. And so it's on businesses to provide that, and it's expensive. So,
Hmm.
generally speaking, globally, what really should business leaders be prioritizing to say, okay, I want to keep attracting people and, more importantly, retaining those people?
I think those two things are, there's different strategies for attraction and for retention, but there's some things that are common or consistent. The Obviously pay is important, but I think if you think about, our own pay when we get paid in organizations and employees get paid, it's it's not really something that keeps you motivated. It might attract you to the organization initially, but then we take it for granted. So pay is not really a motivating factor. It's not something that is going to help retain us. But it can definitely be demotivating if people feel that it's not fair. If they feel like, other people are getting paid a lot more for doing the same work. So the it's really important that we make sure that pay is not an issue that's going to demotivate employees.
Yeah.
So we need to remove that. And the way to do that is by being transparent about our processes and how we make pay decisions. So I think the transparency piece, which we're seeing in the US with a lot of your legislation that's coming through in different states, enforcing organizations to publish pay ranges, not asking candidates about salary history, all these things demonstrate our culture. So that helps to attract. In our report, we found that around, you know, 50% of organizations, you would say, have salary ranges, or I think it might even be a bit higher than that. But of all the organizations that have salary ranges, we found that only 26% were publishing those pay ranges for their employees to see. So a
Wow.
lot of organizations have done the work, they have these pay ranges, but there's a real reluctance to share this. And I think
Yep.
that's a shift in culture that needs to take place, which is really going to drive the attraction of candidates. And that culture, I think, is also going to help them ultimately with retention as well.
Right, the culture of trust that says, "Hey, you did the report, you did the work, you have the reports. Are you gonna share it with us?" The people who you claim are so important to your company, the employees, which honestly, we can't sell our things without employees. I don't care how good the executives are, we need the employees to do that. So, yeah, the culture of trust definitely goes right in there. Hey, I was looking online on, your LinkedIn and saw that there is the case of the Mondays, and there is a recent latest reward pulse survey that is still live. Tell me about the survey so that we can get our listeners to participate. I believe it ends March 28th.
Yes. So, I mean, a case of the Mondays is the book that I wrote. It's built around that
Ah,
the film Office Space, where they talk about a case of the Mondays, and it's around building a culture of trust through pay transparency and attracting and retaining talent. But the report that you mentioned is a pulse survey for us to just ask a few questions around the latest trends in HR and specifically around reward. So, for example, have any adjustments been made to the pay budgets as a result of any changes? So, for example, in the UK, the employer costs have increased as a result of the change in government. So, some organizations are making adjustments. It might be the same in the US if inflation has gone up or is higher than expected or is lower than expected. Companies make adjustments. So we're asking a few questions. That survey is available to participate, and we will send a free copy of the report to all participants. So again, anyone who participates can get a copy of that report.
that's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much for this information. We are here live with Rameez Kaleem, founder and CEO at 3R Strategy, coming in from London, who is a pay and reward expert. Rameez, how can people reach out to you or connect with you?
So the best way to connect is just through LinkedIn. So Rameez Kaleem on LinkedIn, or the website for 3R Strategy is 3r-strategy.com. Or actually, we also have a page that we set up, which is just a case of the Mondays.com.
Awesome. I'll make sure all those links are in there. I love the case of the Monday. I got the reference right away. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise. Thanks everybody for joining. Take care.